Intro.
Welcome to Photography Chat with Merlin. Photography Chat with Merlin.
Thanks everyone for coming into another episode of the Photography Chat. We're at episode 11, and we've got Diane and Conn with us coming from Beverly Hills, California. How are you doing today, Diane?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Do you want to take a second just to let everyone know a little bit about who you are and what you've been working on?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Diane Conn. I am a street photographer, and somehow Merlin discovered me, and I discovered him. And I'm going to talk today about my book called Holding Hands, that is out on Amazon, and it is the result of taking 8,000 individual photos of people holding hands all over the world, and I'm really happy to be here.
8,000? Wow, I didn't realize there was that many. So you just spent, I'm assuming, several years amassing this content.
Yeah, that's a good assumption, like 7 years.
Okay. So when did you start this project?
I took my first conscious picture of people holding hands, I think 2014, and I had no plan. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I did know I loved a digital camera, and I mean an iPhone digital camera, and I can go sideways and say that I had got my first camera, a Kodak Instamatic 124, which of course was only black and white, in high school for selling raffle tickets.
Oh, wow.
I came third in the raffle ticket sales, and I got this camera, which is what I wanted, actually. And I started taking, they're point and shoot in the very simple sense. And you had to pay to have the photos developed, and there were 12 pictures on a roll. So you had to think about what you were going to take a photo of. And I'm going to really jump through. I had some point and shoot digital cameras. The best other camera I had was a Lumix. Totally simple Lumix, and I tried to take my holding hands pictures with it. I never had an SLR. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. It was just not who I was, but this was my Lumix. And the problem I found, because there's problem/challenge I had, which every photographer knows they have some kind of challenge. This is that people don't hold hands for long, which if you start observing people holding hands, you'll see they stop for 20 different reasons. To reach in the pocket, fix their hair, turn a corner, open a door, answer their phone, fix their lipstick, change their clothes. It's unbelievable. So by the time I turn this on, so I'm going to turn it on, 1,000, 2,000. Now I have an image. Now I have to focus it, and it's not an easy focus. So that's the end of that. Picture's gone. So I use my iPhone, which is instant focus, and it's right there. So it's really like a kid's camera in a lot of ways, although as you reminded me, it can do a lot. So that's what I'm using.
It can very much. And the Instamatic, I have to say another Canadian reference with the Instamatic there is the Tragically Hip had that in a song there where it's like they're talking about photos and you have to wait a minute because it's an Instamatic.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's been a real adventure. I know almost anybody who ever had a phone or a point and shoot digital discovered that they could take pictures, randomly of anything, as many as they wanted to, and there's no downside. You just get rid of them. And my husband was an award-winning photographer, and the photo that won him awards was during World War II, so a long time ago. And he's been through, there's still a darkroom out here in the garage that he put together 60 years ago. So, he was Mr. Photography expert, literally, and had every camera there was, and going to digital was a challenge because, in those days it's like, whoa, film only film. Well, harder and harder to do, but I learned so much from watching him take photos because you could put him in an empty room and he'd find an amazing photo. So I learned a lot without even realizing it, watching and observing, and then trying to find my own interest and style. And that led me to pictures of people holding hands taken only from the back.
That's really interesting. I took a look at the book and I liked the sort of idea around it, like that connection of people. And I think, especially given what we've been through the last couple of years, connection is just that much more important. I think a lot of us have sort of felt a lack of community and like connection to other people, especially being in like varying degrees of isolation and lockdown throughout what's been going on in different parts of the world with this pandemic.
Well, Merlin, I know you took photos of yourself during lockdown. I mean, you took photos on a daily basis for a period during lockdown. I'm just wondering what items, if you have any particular items that really draw you to taking pictures of them, no matter what they are, or whether you're choosing differently.
That's a great question. So my friend Brian, bless him, he made a comment to me one day. He's like, you have a really fucked up way that you see the world, and I appreciate that you share that with us with your photos. And I was like, I don't know if that's really a compliment or if you're like, throwing some shade at my photos, but he was just like, you see things that other people don't pay attention to. And that's what I really like to take photos of. Like when I'm walking around, like I'm rarely ever looking like straight forward. It's like I'm looking like up and around and to the sides and stuff, because I like looking for words and messages in like streets and things like that. Or you see in some places people put these like little pieces of art in random places, and if you're not paying attention, you could just like walk past it and miss it. And where that really came to fruition was when I first moved back to Toronto. I was having a hard time connecting to the city because I'd never intended to ever actually live in Toronto. It just kind of, it happened that a situation came up, and in a very short period of time, I found myself living in Toronto. And then I had a lot of time on my hands to contemplate like what decision I had made and what did I do to myself kind of thing. But while I was trying to figure out where I fit in Toronto, I spent a lot of time in Kensington Market there. And one of the things I found really fascinating about the market, because I was there almost every day, was that if you look around at like the graffiti and the stickers and the art and all the different things there, you start to notice that every day it changes, and the market itself is almost like a living thing. Like people are adding to it and removing things, and the weather affects some stuff. And I just found it really fascinating, like all the little things that if you start paying attention start presenting themselves. Like there's this one artist, I have no idea what their name was, but they made these really cool little matchstick robots. And they would put them on like little pieces of wood or like metal or something, and then they'd glue them up in different spaces in the market. And whoever the artist was, they would also camouflage them a little bit. So they'd like paint them black or like make them match in with whatever background they're put into. So unless you were really looking for them, you never really found them. And I always find that kind of stuff interesting. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago I started taking pictures of people, and I was always a little bit nervous about that because people have opinions and feelings and whatnot, whereas like streets and walls and stuff don't really have an opinion on things. So that's been a lot of work, like trying to be comfortable with taking pictures of people, because I don't really want to be disruptive. And I've seen other street photographers out there that they'll just put their camera in someone's face and take a picture and just like walk away from them. And I've kind of created a rule for myself that if something seems like, if I look in the viewfinder of my camera and whatever I'm about to take a picture of feels too intimate to me, that I feel like I have to ask permission before I can take that photo. And so what I do, I had these little cards made. They're from moo.com, and they make that tiny little thing in your, like the little pocket in your jeans, that useless one. It makes them usable. And so it's like, I have like my contact information on it and stuff, and I just say, hey, like, do you mind if I take a picture of you? Like, just pretend like I didn't interrupt you. That thing you were doing before was really cool. And like, I post stuff on Instagram, and if you end up hating it, you can find it here. You can get a hold of me and I can remove it from the internet for you. And people have been really receptive to that.
Generally, they allow it.
Most of the time, yeah. Like some people are like, no, like they get really upset. And then other people are kind of more fascinated. They're like, well, why do you want to take a picture of me? Like, I don't feel that interested. And my favorite thing is actually giving Polaroids to people. Because that one, I don't end up ever having a copy of whatever photo I've created. But if someone looks interesting, I'll offer them either a Fuji Instax photo or a Polaroid photo. And that's been an interesting process. Like when I was helping my partner move from Toronto to Vancouver in November 2020, we stopped in Calgary for a few days. And I was picking up some food from this drive-in diner kind of place. And while I was waiting for the food, I saw this lady and she looked kind of like upset or whatever. And she saw that I had an old Polaroid SLR 680 around my neck, the pop-up Polaroid, similar to the SX70. And she's like, is that an old Polaroid? And like, we had chat about it. And she's like, I didn't know they still made film for those things. And that's kind of wild. And I was like, hey, you know what? Like, do you want a portrait? Like, it's a Polaroid. So like, I'm not going to keep it. It'll be for you. And she's like, oh no, that'd be a waste. Like, and I'm not like worth it or whatever. And I'm like, no, it's like, if you want a portrait, here's a chance. You can have this moment. And she's like, you know what? Okay, fine. And it was like during pandemic time. So she was wearing a mask and she's like, do I take the mask off? Like, do I keep it on? I'm like, well, this is your portrait. So like, how do you want you to be pictured? And she's like, I'll take the mask off. And so I took the photo and Polaroid, the new Polaroid is not quite the same as the old stuff. So you have to have a little bit more care with it. So when you first shoot the frame, you want to shield it from light for like the first 2 to 5 minutes. If it's cold out, you also want to keep it warm. So one of the things I do, I tuck it under the armpit for like a minute so it keeps it warm, make sure that the development is smooth. And so we were just chatting a little bit while it was developing. Then I gave it to her and like she had a little bit of a moment because she's like, you wouldn't imagine the day that I've had today. It's just been a really terrible day. And she's like, this is a really nice end note to the day. And that was something I was like, photography is kind of a cool thing because it helps connect people. It helps people feel good about themselves. And, sometimes it makes them feel bad depending on what kind of photography it is. But there's just a lot of different visceral things about photography.
Yeah, there certainly are. And, it's a very different approach to talk to people. I don't talk to people. As all the photos are taken from behind, so I don't have to deal with, do they want their photo taken or not? And there might be recognizable to them and a few close friends, but that is going to be it. And there are very few, but occasionally I will take a photo and think, gee, it's tempting to say, excuse me, I just took your photo. Can I show it to you? And I'm happy to send it to you if you'd like it. So, because, nobody sees themselves from the back anyway.
No.
So anyway, I haven't done it yet. I'll report back if I do. But for now, I just take them anonymously and there they are.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. Like, you think back in the day, photography was such it's like a powerful tool, and it wasn't in the hands of everyone. So, you mentioned that Century book yesterday. There was a time when people would get excited that someone random had a camera and they would want their picture taken. They'd never see it because that person, they'd never see that person again. But just the idea that they'd be immortalized with something would get people excited. And there used to be a lot more. It's like emphasis on the importance of cataloging and photographing these things. I know there's a time period there where the U.S. government would have staff photographers whose job was just to drive around America and take pictures of the state of America at that time, because it was important to archive that. And I feel like that's something that we've sort of lost in the past years.
I think it came out for Expo 67 in Canada, but there was a famous book that came out by the name of Call Them Canadians. And I'm not sure who did it, but they went around the country and took pictures of random people doing random things all across the country to show a portrait of the country and its people. And it reminds me of that. Remember A Day in America?
I haven't seen that one, no.
Oh, it's worth having a look at. There's a photo book called, I think it's called A Day in the Life of America. But on one day, from midnight all the way for 24 hours, they took pictures all over the country of anything and everything on that one day. And I believe it was called A Day in the Life of America, but it was really a great idea. Here's all the different things that can happen in a day. You may be looking for it. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, I'm just writing these down because these sound great. I do like those kind of things, like Robert Frank's The Americans is a fantastic one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, it was kind of poo-pooed on originally because, you know, he didn't show America at its, like, strongest and most, like, powerful. He showed the sort of downtrodden side of it that, you know, we tend to know is maybe a little bit more common than, like, the, you know, uber powerful, like, you know, number one country in the world sort of, like, stance that the U.S. likes to pose. You know, he showed it a bit more delicate and human, and as it was. That's a great book. And like Fred Herzog's, any of his books, capture Canada in such a beautiful way. And those I find are like books like that are important because it catalogs this like time period, and it's just interesting to see what people looked like in those times and what they were getting up to. So I think it's really cool, the book that you did, because you've captured a bit of that, like, you know, not only the connection of people, but seeing the different styles of all the different places. Like, what cities did you take this in? I'm gonna guess like there was a bit in California and also New York, but were there other places that you photographed?
There's a Toronto photo. There are a couple photos in Toronto, mostly winter because that's when I was there. There's photos in Mexico, various parts of Mexico, Mexico City and Oaxaca and San Miguel. There's photos in Paris. There's photos in Copenhagen, outside Copenhagen at the what's it called? The ship museum. Okay. And, you know, they're all over the place. Wherever I was, and Rome, countryside, it really, as you know, I mean, I can hardly wait to get back to traveling. Plus, it's a great hobby. You know, it's great to have a hobby. And also, as you can see in the book, people had masks on and they're holding hands, or gloves on, either winter gloves in Canada or, you know, sanitary gloves, and they're holding hands. So it's so clear that connection. I've seen people kissing through masks, you know, on the street. They both have their masks on and they stop for a kiss. It's the same kind of thing. They just want that sense of connection. And I think it's so important. And, you know, one more book that blew me away is by the French photographer Adjé. And it's literally on purpose the size of a Paris brick from the cobblestone.
Oh, cool.
I have it in New York. It's probably 1,200 pages. And he goes through all 12 of the arrondissements. I think there's 12, maybe there's 16 or 19 by now, however many there are, or by now that I'm finally learning about, maybe 20, let's say, that, you know, he goes through all of them and takes photos in all of them in order, like goes through them all. And it's just, they're old, they're black and white, they're streets, they're empty buildings, they're people doing things. And it's wonderful to see that array of images across a time and space.
Yeah, stuff like that is absolutely beautiful. I'm not familiar with that book, but in a little bit more recent time, Jason Lee did a really beautiful book of Texas that he called A Plain View. And he spent several months road tripping around in an old Lincoln Town Car through Texas, just taking pictures of things that most people would drive past, like, you know, old burger shacks that are now like all boarded up and have like residential areas that have grown in around them, and like, you know, they're sort of the odd duck out kind of thing. And the thing that's interesting about the book is you'd think all the places he shot were abandoned because you don't see a single person in any of the photos, but he's just like, these were just sleepy towns in Texas that definitely were inhabited, but they're just, you didn't really see anyone around there. And it was cool too because he shot all of that with a 4x5 camera and expired Kodak 4x5 film, which from a technical perspective was kind of cool, and just interesting that most people would try and use something a little simpler, and he's got a thing where it takes 15 minutes or so just to even get ready to take one photo.
Did they work with the expired film?
Yeah, it worked actually quite well because he used this thing. It's called Ready Load, which was a really cool concoction between Kodak and Fuji, and they made these little satchels that enclosed a 4x5 film frame inside of it. So typically with 4x5, you have to manually load it in a dark bag or a dark room and put it into the film holders, and it's a lot of work and fussing to make an image with it. But this Ready Load stuff made it super easy because you just take this little satchel and you put it in a special Ready Load holder, throw it in your camera, take the picture, pull it out, and then you just send that satchel to your lab for development. But because Fuji is Fuji, the product ended up dying and they stopped producing it. So he went on a big eBay tear and bought up all of the Ready Load that he could find and used as much of it as he could for the project. But it was just cool seeing these places that we've all done the road trips where it's you just see these nondescript things as you're driving around and you don't really pay any mind to them, but it was just kind of neat to see someone taking the time to be this looks important and I'm going to capture this. And it just elicits a lot of feelings when you're looking through stuff like that because it triggers memories that you may have that you've forgotten about.
I agree. I've been looking through some old photo books. My husband had quite a collection of photo books, and I'm just now flipping through them, and there's several like that. It also reminds me of that great old movie, The Last Picture Show, which an old black and white film, not that old, maybe from the late 70s, but there's so many images in this black and white film that seem like they're photographs.
Oh, wild.
It's Peter Bogdanovich directed, Sybil Shepherd, Timothy Bottoms. It's really great, but it's very visual. When I think of the film, I think of the visuals. I think of the tumbleweed blowing through this small, dying Texan town. Images evoke so much for us.
They absolutely do. A friend was just visiting my studio here this week, and I showed her this documentary from my childhood, which was not that long ago, in the 90s. But there was this skateboard music tour that happened in British Columbia in 1999 called Hicks on Sticks. And a band that I grew up with was one of the bands that was playing in this musical skateboarding fantastical tour. Unfortunately, the tour wasn't the grand thing that they thought it was all going to turn out to, and it bankrupted the skateboard company that started it. They were called Powder Milk Skateboards. And everyone participating ended up having to pony in their own money just to finish the tour. And I had no idea that any of this was the case. When we got to play, I was in a crappy band when I was in high school, and we got to open for this show, and so we were just all excited of the opportunity to play with our heroes and see some cool skateboarding. But then they made a documentary of how this abysmal failure was kind of an epic road trip adventure, but it just sort of went over the disaster that it was. And I was showing her some clips from this documentary, and it was just wild seeing things that don't exist anymore. Because in the Coquihalla, it used to be a toll road not that long ago, I think within the last probably 15 years. But there's people who've started driving that have no idea that at one time it was a toll road, and to access it halfway through, you had to go through a toll booth and give them $10 so that you could continue the rest of the way on your trip. And it was just kind of wild to see that they captured some video where they're just at the toll booths at the rest stop there, and It's just interesting, like how that kind of imagery brings back things.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I mean, I love looking through photo books. It's probably my one of the favorite things I do is looking through, whether it's photos of sculpture or art or people or cities or whatever. I just love looking at images, I guess, because you can also tell your own stories.
You can tell your own stories with it, and I think making photo books is a very important thing too, because all of us have so many interesting things we could share, and I think some people have this fear that like maybe their photography is not good enough because they didn't use a fancy camera, or they don't have like an agent or something like that. Which is why I found your story very interesting, is that you built this beautiful book just with iPhone photos. And it just like, I find that really wonderful, because it's just proof that like the barrier of entry to create something awesome isn't that high. Like, you have it in your pocket right now. You can start creating.
Right.
And, I don't like that there's some gatekeepers in the photography world that make people feel like maybe they're not like worthy or like good enough because they don't have some fancy camera, or they don't understand the technical aspects of like, shutters and apertures and all that. And, to be completely frank.
That's me. That person is me, Marilyn. I mean, the great thing about getting older is I don't care what people think about me. And I don't care about what they think about what I'm doing. I love it. I'm happy with it. I know it works. People respond to it, and that's enough for me. But You're right. 20 years ago, I would have been all worried that I didn't know from cameras, and I'd be listening to my husband talk about them, and it's going, shoot, because you know what? I don't, it's not who I am. I'd much rather just take a shot and see what happens. None of my photos, I didn't make any changes in them. The guy who did the layout for the book may have made some changes, but by and large, they're just the photos I took. They're not filtered. They're not cut. They're not cropped. They're not stretched or not stretched. They're just what I took. And that's kind of like, that's sort of my philosophy, is I want to see the world as it is. And going back to, we didn't talk about photorealism, but one of my husband's great heroes was David Douglas Duncan, who's really well known for war photography in particular.
Okay.
And we have some books of his, Korean War especially, some major images. And really was embedded in the very first embedding, people did it before in World War II, but this was really amazing. And I found a book in the famous library I've been telling you about called the Pulitzer Prize Archive, which is Press Photography Awards 1942 to 1998. So what's interesting about this is several things. One, most of them have people in them, but then they don't have them all. So this is, Babe Ruth retiring from professional baseball.
Oh, wild.
You see, it's his back.
Yeah.
Right? Accepting the adulation of the crowd and the players and everybody else. And that was him retiring. That was 1948. And, planes, only because these are amazing. This is a near collision. I don't know how they got the photo.
Whoa.
But it's planes in a near collision. And this is the one photo that won for that year. If you think of all the photos, even in those days, that were taken. I'll just do this last one. Refugees going across a wrecked bridge in Korea, 1951.
Holy shit.
I mean, it's kind of, in those days, what it took to get those photos, you've got it. I mean, the cameras were, big and cumbersome, and God knows the credentials they had to get anywhere. And all of those were clearly some sort of press position. The guys up and above the bridge and the planes. I don't know how he got that. And Babe Ruth, they're down there. But it's, that ability to find that moment and capture that moment that I think can be so life-changing. I don't know if you remember, there was a picture, I think in National Geographic, of these, one of the many famines in Africa, and there's a vulture on the road,
Yeah.
and there's a little baby that's dying.
I do remember that one.
And I am sure that I read a story that the photographer of that photo died by suicide some years later. And, I read about how incredibly difficult it was to document things like that. And the impact it has on the photographer, which, you don't normally hear about. You just see these amazing photos. And Mr. Korean War there with the bridge, seeing thousands of refugees, what does that do to you? And now somebody who's in Ukraine photographing, and we've seen that photographers have been killed last week, taking photos, trying to document what's going on. So, to me, it's an incredibly noble profession in every level, at every level, no matter what you're doing. It's about trying to document the world we live in. That's my big thought for the day.
No, I completely agree though. Like it's important to document this and leave something behind. I don't consider myself a photographer, really. I think I'm more of an archivist. I use photography as a tool to capture what I see around me and the people that are important and the things I find important. And a lot of it stems from mental illness. So I've struggled with depression and suicidal ideation for most of my life, and it's something that is it's just weird having a thought that I know I'm not gonna be around for very long, not because of natural causes, but because at some point I'm gonna lose the war with my mind. So until that happens, I've been using photography as a way to have something that I can hopefully leave behind and someone finds it and can see, some of the interesting places I've been able to go and interesting people I've been able to meet, and not have those stories just kind of die with me. And so I feel like photography can be a powerful tool for a lot of different things.
I think so too, but now is the time where I am compelled to say, I'm sorry to hear what you've just said, and I totally understand you. And for anybody who's watching, the phone number is 1-800-SUICIDE. If you're in trouble and you're depressed and you want someone to talk to, there's also 1-800-GET-HELP. And there's texting. There's a suicide text line, which I think is 611, but I'll look it up before we're finished. And there's also, Canada has their own mental health lines and advocacy. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. But
I don't know those numbers off the top of my head either. But I would say calling those numbers is far more important than calling for a health check on someone. That's the last thing you should ever do. I know that Colorado has made a big change where if people call for health checks there, they don't send police. They send a crisis advisor and someone who can do mental assessments. And it's a pilot program, and they've done 2,700 successful calls, and not a single one of those calls required police intervention. So that's become a bit of a prototype for other countries in the U.S. to start adopting. And I really hope that other countries everywhere start adopting that, because that's one thing I worry about. And I talk openly about what I go through, and it makes me worried a little bit that, sometimes someone might call a mental health check on me, and I don't want that, because, I've seen what the police do, and also I'm not white. So it's a double bogey for me there. So, don't call the cops on your friends, just check in on them and try and support them as much as you can.
And I will say, I just looked it up. The crisis text line is 741-741. Text HOME to 741-741. 24/7 crisis counseling. There's a documentary that HBO made. I think it's called Joe and Ernie, but it is about these former cops who are trained in mental health, and they are the guys who go on the calls. instead of the police with guns. They don't carry guns. They know where all the mental health sources are in the town in Texas, and they take them there. They meet the person somewhere and they escort them there and they follow up with them. There's so much to say about it. And, one of the reasons I put this book together was that I found that looking on my iMac at these images of people holding hands taken from the back, just going through the images, I felt better. Something about seeing that connection just improved my mood a little bit. And if you've struggled or suffered or hated or had or lived with or beside depression, some of us know that an incremental increase can make a big difference and sort of get you over the bar of, oh, you know what? It's okay. To, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Both of which side I've been on. And that was also part of the reason I did the book. And I talk about in the introduction that my mother died by suicide when I was a teenager. And that was before anybody talked about it. They didn't. They figured the safest thing to do was say nothing and just hope that everybody, got over it. And now it's totally different. People talk about it and share about it and try and get help about it. And there's all these organizations. And there's one I'm working with, hopefordepression.org, which is based in New York. And they are getting a portion of the proceeds from the book because they're really working to educate, destigmatize, and do research to help this massive problem that's so underfunded because nobody wants to talk about it. So here we are talking about it and wanting to reach out and let people know there's help no matter where they are. And, interestingly enough, one more thing is that 30% of the calls that the National Suicide Hotline gets are for people who are concerned about a loved one or a friend and literally don't know what to do. And they're also helpful with, what to say, what not to say, what you can do, how you can try and get help for yourself, for them. There's an array of help out there for people.
And that's a great point there. And I just looked it up here. The Canada hotline is 1-833-456-4566. And yeah, it is something that even in recent time was not really discussed. Like when I started being more open about it in 2013, 2014, I started being open about on social media about it because I got tired of pretending because I was finding I was having a really difficult time keeping track of all the lies that I was telling people to front that I was okay. And people would be like, oh, you said that about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, sorry. It's like, I can't keep track of what I'm saying to other people to pretend like I'm okay. So I was like, fuck it. Honesty is the best policy. This is where I'm at. And the response was interesting because a great deal of people were like, whoa, shut the fuck up. Don't say that. You're going to end your career. You're not going to be able to do it. No one's going to want to work with you because they'll think you're crazy. And then another bunch of people were like, hey, thank you for opening up about this because I have my own demons I'm working with or my own concerns, and I kind of felt alone with it. And so they're like, it's nice to know that someone else someone else who they thought was a little more put together was also struggling with it. So it's important to be open and honest if you can. Yeah. And just know that it's okay to not be okay. I've especially found in talking with lots of different creatives that this is not an uncommon theme for most of us creatives, that we deal with darkness and things like that, which I think allows a lot of us to see the light in a very different way when we see it, because we've seen how dark things can get. So when we see beautiful things, we can appreciate it like that much more, and it gets us more excited about it. Yeah, it's just it's an interesting balance to make, though.
Very much so.
Yeah, sorry to get a bit heavy there.
it ties in with photography because, taking pictures of people, I can guarantee that some percentage of the people I took photos of were struggling with depression, just by definition.
Well, and especially given the current climate of things, because we've been dealing with an unprecedented thing these last couple of years that has caused a lot of people who've never had to deal with mental health stuff before to have feelings of depression and things like that. I've had a lot of friends that are like, oh my God, this is what you've lived with? How? I've just started feeling this way, and it's devastating. And, it's this is just what you go through every day. And I'm like, yeah, pretty much. You just got to find reasons to keep going. And photography has been a really big one for me with that. And same with doing this chat. It's fun to talk with a different person every week and get to know different people, but also to share that. There's been a few times I've wanted to just be you know what, this is a lot of work to do by myself, and I'm just gonna pack it in. And every time that I've started to get that feeling, I'll get a message from someone being like, hey, I just wanted to say I appreciate what you're doing with this chat because I felt really isolated, and this is a nice way to feel connected to people, and it's really cool to get to know these people virtually through listening to your things. And I'm like, all right, I can't quit yet. This is a bit bigger than
tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe tomorrow.
I mean, it's a day at a time with a lot of this stuff. And, for me, it sounds like yours is not dissimilar. I found I have a toolkit, and photography is absolutely part of my toolkit. I mean, first of all, it gets me out in the world, and that in itself helps me feel better. Outside, fresh air, moving, and taking the pictures always helps, and seeing other people in the world always helps. So, I meditate, I exercise, there's a lot of stuff. I read novels because I love seeing, other worlds, and great writing is amazing to me. So there's a lot of things that those of us who live with this do to feel better. That's my experience anyway. It sounds like you have your own list.
Yeah, for me, a big part of it was photography really, it gave me a bit of a purpose. And it started in 2008 was what really kicked it off. And I talked a little bit about this with my last guest last week, Stephen. But I went to a photo workshop in Boston at the Leica store. And that was a bit of a turning point for me because I kind of hit this point where it's you know what, I'm ready to end it. And I'm just done with all of this. And I decided, before I do it, I'm going to take this trip to Boston and just do that because I wanted to meet one of my photography heroes. And I thought that would be kind of cool. And on that trip, I kind of found a new lease. I made a really good friend there, and he introduced me to this world of instant photography and the instant photography community. And from there, that just exploded into this finding a new family kind of thing, and did a lot of traveling. So before the pandemic, I would frequently go down to Texas to see the photography people down there in Denton at the Instant Film Society. Travel to different shows. There was one, the Darkroom Lab did a really cool thing in San Clemente in 2019 called a Film Paideia, which is a knowledge sharing weekend. And that was I met Grant Britton there, and he's a fantastic photographer and also just a weird and wonderful guy. And it was cool to have him as a guest. And Pete Gamascus, who just joined here, he's someone that I also met through this whole crazy photography journey. And someone that I'm hoping to do some road trips with in the future when things ease up a bit. So yeah, it's really cool finding something that connects you, because there is a really interesting connection capability that photos have with people. And I find it also when giving an instant photo to someone, there's also something really cool about that tangibility of handing someone something and just seeing them sort of light up when they can see it. Because I won't lie, I think the phones and everything are great with how they make things so easy. But the only problem with the phones and digital cameras and things like that is we take all of these photos that, unless we make a concerted effort like you did to put together this book, we end up with this volume of photos that just go nowhere. And
That's right. That's right.
That's kind of a tragic thing because, we took this photo because we felt it was important, but then it gets lost in the mix of things. Like, I think I have like 40,000 photos on my iPhone right now, and I can't keep track of what's on there. But when I take like my film photos and stuff, it's a little easier to keep track of that.
But it's also, you've probably done it. It's hours and hours and hours to organize them. I mean, there's no, I will say I have close to 200,000 photos on my iMac. I'm not proud of it. I try and get rid of them, but that's because I can take, I don't know, hundreds in a day because I'll follow along behind somebody and it'll take me 20, 30 images to get the hand swing right and the lights and nobody else around and whatever. And, do I go back and get rid of all the not good ones? Not often enough, and it sort of has become it's kind of like an endless task, so you can dig in and do it. Like, even getting rid of 1,000 is unnoticeable. So but I hear you, because when you're doing your instant photos, that's it. You have to really think about it, which is kind of wonderful.
It is kind of wonderful, and like it's a cool gift to be able to share with someone. But even if you're not doing instant, like, and you're shooting with a digital camera, you're shooting with an iPhone, like, you can pick up little printers that allow you to print the images on things, or you can send them to a lab and get them printed. Or even if you wanted to throw together a book and you feel intimidated by it, you really shouldn't. There's lots of cool services out there. One that myself and a bunch of friends have used to make books for ourselves and to put out for friends is Blurb. And a lot of us have found that it's worked really well. The quality is fairly decent. The price is fairly decent, and they do offer print on demand options, which I took advantage of for this last book. Because I just didn't have the capacity to do a volumed run on it myself and do all the shipping and everything, like I did for the first book that I put out. And it just, if I waited for the time I had that capacity to do it, it probably would just never see the light of day. So I just decided, you know what, to heck with it. I'm just going to throw it on Blurb and put it in the print shop, and people can just, buy it at their own will. So there's lots of cool tools where you can make things to get out there. And if you don't think you have something interesting to share, I'm going to challenge you and say that you're probably wrong. You probably have lots of interesting things that to you may not seem interesting, but to other people it may be absolutely fascinating and something they've never seen before, or something that conjures up different thoughts or inspires them to do something. So, by all means, share.
Everybody has a story.
Yeah.
Everybody has a story. And that, is a real lesson in life. If you're young watching this, everybody has a story. You don't want to go to your, quote, boring aunts and uncles or grandpas. Trust me, if you ask them about their life, you will be amazed.
Exactly. Or even just talking to strangers. So a couple of years ago, I took a road trip to Tulsa, and we drove through parts of the old Route 66. And we stopped in, I think it was Miami, Missouri. It's spelled Miami, but it's Miami. And which I thought was kind of hilarious. But we went to White's Grill there, and there was this lady working there named Peggy. Fantastic woman. She had really interesting stories and just was so willing to share. And I thought that was really beautiful, and we've actually become like Facebook pals now. And so it's like this lady who I saw once, who served me a really great breakfast, has become a friend of sorts. And we stay in touch. And that trip, talking to lots of different strangers, really left me with this impression that there's so many people out there that have these like really wonderful, fantastic stories of things that they've experienced, that those stories are going to just kind of die with them unless someone hears those stories and finds a way to share them or like capture them or something. And it kind of bummed me out a little bit that like these really interesting people will just kind of they'll fade away when they do. And it made me wish I was like independently wealthy, so all I could do is just like drive around and like take photos and interview people and like create like a compendium of like all of these interesting stories of like random strangers.
Well, we know that anybody and everybody could fill a 20-page blurb photo book with their life.
Absolutely.
And everybody has the stories or images to do it, or images of, oh, I went to Paris one year, Eiffel Tower, whatever it is. Because the older people get, the less they're seen, of course. That's another whole topic. People sort of walk by old people, but man, those stories are unbelievable. And my husband was much older than me, so I met a lot of people who had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 careers. Oh, and wow. hearing about them, because even more so now, but even in the olden days, people had, often more than one career or more than one job for sure. And it's just amazing to hear how people move from one thing to another, Yeah,
and that's like an interesting point that you made there is like older people kind of become a bit invisible. And I think that's a tragic shame because they have...
In this society anyway, in our world.
Yeah, in like North American society, it's just like whatever, ship them off to the old folks' home and, let the care aides deal with them, which I find wickedly tragic because these people have wonderful stories. They still have so much to share and so much to offer. And the world, we keep proving it time and time again, everything is very cyclical. So, what some of these people have experienced, their knowledge and experience with that will be just as valuable today as it was for them when they were going through that, if we just took the time to listen to them. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's unfortunate we don't. And, just even like talking to strangers, like we've become very isolated and just sort of like defensive, and it just showing some kindness and spending a couple minutes to chat with someone, you get some really interesting stories. Like I met this guy, Mike. He's a houseless gentleman that lives near the grocery store that I shop at, and he sorry, just a sec here. He was interesting because like I kind of liked the way that he was looking, and he just was like a very odd looking character. And I started chatting with him and asked him if I could take his photo, and he was like, yeah, that's totally fine, like you can take my photo. And I was like, yeah, what's your name? And he's like, oh, well, my name is Mike, but you can call me the Sasquatch, because he's like, people call me the Main Street Sasquatch. And he's like, on account of my like big beard and like big hair. And he was just like a really cool guy that, probably a couple hundred people that day just walked past and didn't think twice about. But, it didn't like ruin my day at all to take 5 minutes just to treat him like a decent human being and, listen to his story. And, now Mike, the Main Street Sasquatch, will live a little bit longer because I remember his story a bit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Which brings up memories and photos and how important photos can be in remembering things. Absolutely.
And like, that's one of the things that, photos in general, I appreciate, and why I started shooting a lot more, because of, even before my car accident, my memory was starting to fail me a bit. But post the car accident a couple of years ago, my memory is absolutely garbage now. So I can't remember, things very easily. So I find the photos help a lot. Like when I look at a photo, and especially instant photos, I almost find instant photos like they're like a time machine. Like when I pick up an instant photo, I can picture that moment and everything else that was around me when I was taking that photo, and I can just kind of like close my eyes and see that moment, just because I picked up that photo and took a look at it.
That's amazing. I mean, I similarly, I can look at just about any photo I've taken and tell you where I was and in New York, sort of what block I took it on, and it is amazing. Well, they still don't know how the brain works. There's still no idea, like, how does memory work? How does that work? And then you discover that when it comes to crimes, witnesses have terrible memories. Do you have a blue shirt or red shirt? Do you have glasses or not? Was there a beard or not? What color was the hair? Was it receding? It's like they don't match up. So it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, brains are an interesting thing, and like dealing with all the doctors since the car accident has been an interesting one, because most of them have, like, I had one guy legit say, like, a doctor, he was like, the brain is a magical, mystical thing that we barely understand. And I was like, as someone coming to you looking for help for a traumatic brain injury, that is not inspiring for assistance.
True.
That you're referring to it as this magical, mythical beast kind of thing.
Well, it's kind of interesting, having also had a serious concussion and suffered with post-concussion syndrome for 2 years. I also identify with that. And I also, it's been interesting in COVID, hearing about people, they really organized, those long COVID people. They got organized. They got Facebook groups. They're getting research done. It's amazing and encouraging, because nobody's done that.
No.
Post-concussive syndrome, and there's millions and millions of people who have it. I read some study that they figure 10 to 20% of all adults have had a concussion, usually undiagnosed at some point. I had a girlfriend who had a fall and didn't hit her head, but she had a real concussion. I mean, she had issues with vision and memory and balance for weeks and weeks and weeks after. Anyway.
Well, you don't necessarily need to hit your head, because, like, our brain is pretty soft and mushy, but the inside of our skull is very not. And so even if you don't hit your head, if you have enough movement around that you knock your brain meat around inside of the skull cave, that's enough to cause some issues there. Like, my doctor was treating someone who just bumped their head on a cupboard and could no longer speak English. They had to, like, go see a speech person to relearn how to speak English again, just from, like, a little bump on a cupboard.
It's intense. I mean, that's a whole other subject.
Absolutely. I feel like we've covered quite an interesting gamut, and I've had a fantastic time chatting with you. I have to be totally frank, though. I have no idea how this happened. I believe your publicist somehow came across me, because I got a random email from him asking if I'd be interested to chat with you, and I was a little surprised by that, because I don't advertise for the chat or anything like that. So this has been a first for me, where I'm talking to someone that I wasn't familiar with beforehand.
Well, I think we did fine being introduced. And I do want to say that, by the way, if you follow the rest of Route 66 out to Santa Monica here, you'll go at the bottom of my street.
Oh, wild.
Santa Monica Boulevard out here, there's signs that say Old Route 66. And it literally ends at the Santa Monica Pier. That's the end of Route 66, is the end of the pier. Just
That's
for
really
future
cool.
reference, next time you're here, take a picture of it. But I really appreciate your time and attention and honesty and great subjects and topics. And I still have to look up that what are you calling it? Instant photography?
Yeah, I'll send you an email on some stuff there to check out, because I think you might get a kick out of that, because there's some of the they're very easy to use. You don't need to know anything. It's just you load
right
film.
Up my alley.
Yeah.
Right up my alley. But it also reminds me of the old Polaroids. My older sister, who had all sorts of things I didn't have, like knew who the Doors were, and all that stuff. She also got one of the early Kodak Instamatic cameras, and I really remember that. And then on movie sets, the script supervisors in particular use them all the time to document what the wardrobe looked like, what the set looked like, whatever, because there you had it. Occasionally you have actors saying, I didn't have my hair, in that kerchief, and you show them the Polaroid and they say the Polaroid's wrong, and you say, well, I don't think the Polaroid's wrong because that's what it is. It documents. That's what photos do so well, is document.
Absolutely.
But, I really appreciate your time. I'm going to hold this up one more time, holding hands, so people can have a look at it. And I look forward to conversing further about some of these things, getting your email, and I appreciate that you have an audience. I'm really glad you're doing this. There's so many things to talk about. There's a million things that touch on photography.
Well, and that was kind of the idea with this, was there's thousands of other shows out there where people talk about gear, they talk about film, they get really deep and technical, but I haven't really come across many where they talk with the photographer and learn more about them. And so I really have no idea what I'm doing with this thing. It's just kind of like by the seat of my pants. But the idea is the loose connection is some kind of photography aspect is used in someone's creative practice. And then we just sort of talk from there. And that's been cool because I've been able to talk with some, I talked to someone that did stop motion animation and t-shirt printing because, there was some sort of photographic element to that. Mm-hmm. And so it's just been a lot of fun. And, thank you again for spending some time with me. And I look forward to conversing with you more. And I'm very curious about this book collection.
Yes, I will let you know. You're welcome to have a look at it.
Definitely.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Oh, and sorry. And if you want to get the book, check out her bio. Her Instagram is They're Holding Hands. And there's a link in the bio there where you can purchase the book, or it's just on Amazon, Holding Hands, right?
Mm-hmm. By Diane, Conn, Conn. Rare spelling, but that's what it is.
Well, thank you again so much, Diane. It's been so great chatting with you. And next week, I'm going to have Brian Brooks joining from San Francisco. He's going to be doing a bit of a recap on Policon Bay Area, which just happened last weekend. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it down there. It's the first time I felt FOMO since this whole pandemic started. It was kind of terrible.
It's amazing what your FOMO moment can be.
Yeah, it was just wild because, so Policon is like a big Polaroid festival. And it originally started in Denton, Texas. And Brian Brooks convinced the Instant Film Society based in Denton, Texas, to do an event in San Francisco in 2020, and that was the last time I was ever in the U.S. was March 2020, the weekend San Francisco started shutting down, and that was a very surreal weekend. So unfortunately, I missed this year's event, but Brian will be joining us to talk a bit about it, and hopefully see everyone in Denton. But thank you again, Diane. It was super great. I'm gonna do the outro here. And if you want her book, check out her Instagram page or search Holding Hands by Diane Conn, Conn, on Amazon. And, stay safe out there, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you.
All right, bye.